Oh god, I'm fucking hungover. If you're wondering why I look like I've been dragged through a hedge backwards, it's because I probably was and just don't remember it. Last week, the developers of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League released the first episode in a new series called Suicide Squad Insider. Firstly, who came up with that name? Suicide Squad : Kill the Justice League, Suicide Squad Insider 01 : Story and Gameplay, PS5 games. That was definitely written by a fucking AI and not one of the smart Skynet spawning ones either. This is basically the first episode of a new Dev Diary style series that's supposed to provide a closer look into certain aspects of the game. For those unaware, Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League is the next and long-awaited game from developers Rocksteady, the people behind the famed Batman Arkham series. It's been the source of much controversy as fans, and I count myself among them, have been waiting since 2015, that's over 8 years now if you're mathematically challenged, since Rocksteady's last game Arkham Knight. And what we eventually get is, you guessed it, what appears to be a game with a bunch of live service shit, which has no business being in there, shoved into it. For the two of you out there who actually pay any attention to anything I say, you'll know I've been pretty negative on Suicide Squad so far, and I was planning to just basically ignore its existence from here on out, just like I do with that weird thing on my ass.
As I suspected. It's a Kundus.
However, curiosity got the better of me and I forced myself to watch this. As I mentioned before, there's been quite a lot of backlash about the game's live service elements, so much so that it was actually delayed after its last major showing, which was the first time that people actually learned what the game really was. So the first thing that stood out to me when I was watching this episode is there's very little reference to the fact that this is going to be a live game at all. And instead, those who feature in the video mention the word story about 7,000 times in the first minute and a half.
Storytelling and story. It's a story-driven game.
This feels very much like a concerted effort to try and downplay the live service aspects of the games, and although it will play ostensibly different with Suicide Squad being a third-person shooter, they want to try and make you think that it might still be one of those little fucking piddly single-player games that don't make them enough money, but us little rats seem to love so much. In fact, they go so far as to throw in a line to try and suggest that going live service was actually some sort of creative or artistic choice.
There was just an opportunity there to expand into co-op and have this dynamic world where friends can come together to share an experience.
Fuck you, asshat. You didn't go live service because co-op just happened to fit so well in the Suicide Squad. It was because some exec sees Harley Quinn in Fortnite and how much money that makes and wants more of that action. The Warner Brothers CEO was literally just talking about how live service games equal dollary dues, so that's what they're going to be focusing on going forward. So don't even try and pass it off as something creative or artistic. If there's one thing that pisses me off more than greed ruining games and art, it's being spoken to like a fucking child. Surprisingly, the live service element of the game is not actually the thing that I hate the most about it. I actually like live service games. I was addicted to Destiny for years. I recently enjoyed Gotham Knights. Back in the day I was even obsessed with DC Universe Online, although you know, that's more of a traditional MMO. So I'm not adverse to the idea of a cool superhero live service game that I can sink 1,000 hours into. But there are some specific problems with this game individually that I just think it's not going to cut it. Firstly, I just don't really like the characters, to be honest. I might be in the minority here because the Suicide Squad films obviously do well enough. But I just think the Suicide Squad fucking suck, man. I just don't want to play as any of them. They're all fucking lame. Deadshot looks generic as fuck. I'm sick of the sight of Harley Quinn at this point. Who the fuck is Captain Boomerang? And I'm not some sort of weird ocean furry, so I don't want to play as an anthropomorphic shark. Ocean furry? Is that a thing? Or is it called something else? Like a scaly or a finny? Okay, I'm taking the piss slightly for a bit. But in all seriousness, being a superhero or a supervillain is supposed to be a power fantasy, and part of that fantasy is embodying cool, badass characters, and in my humble opinion, all these guys are lame and I don't want to be any of them. Basically, I just want to be Batman or Superman or Wonder Woman or Aqua. Let's not get carried away with ourselves. My point is I have a massive problem with the fundamental concept of this game. I don't want to play as a bunch of losers who are trying to kill the Justice League. I want to play as the fucking Justice League, and I really wish Rocksteady had just made that game. I'm also really worried about the tone of this game and the type of humour it seems to be going for. What little they've shown so far has just been packed with the worst written, cringiest quips you've ever heard.
I'm always first on the trigger.
Let's make like cheap chewing gum and not stick around.
It's obviously difficult to tell based on just a small amount of footage how egregious this is going to be, but if this is an indication of the overall tone that the game will set, I think I want to blow my brains out after a few hours. Feels potentially like a Borderlands type scenario where they're just trying too hard.
Hey, Suicide Squad! Fuck you!
Last but not least is the gameplay. As I alluded to before, Suicide Squad is a meaningful departure from the Arkham formula. It seems to be a third-person shooter more than anything else, with some melee abilities woven in. One major element of the gameplay seems to be traversal. Each character has their own unique traversal mechanic, like Harley Quinn seems to swing about like Spider-Man for some reason. I remember thinking at the initial reveal that these abilities didn't really jive with what we know about these characters. It felt kind of forced so that they have like a fun way of getting about the city, and we learn that's because their abilities come from stuff they nick from the Justice League headquarters. So like Harley Quinn's is some riff on the grapple gun that Batman uses in the Arkham games, although I'm still not quite sure how that equals Spider-Man, but there you go. I'm somewhat torn on the traversal, to be honest. There are parts of the footage where it does look really quick and sleek and possibly fun, but then there are parts, mostly around when there's combat involved, where I think it looks a bit slower than you'd perhaps want and maybe a little cumbersome. At the risk of sounding like a broken record a bit, I just finished Spider-Man 2 and the traversal in that game is flawless. Watching Suicide Squad by comparison looks maybe a little bit stunted and clunky. In terms of the combat, again, I don't want to jump to too many conclusions without having played the game. My only feedback really would be that a lot of the things I see look as if they lack impact. The guns in particular seem to all sound like toys. You know, this could just be a pre-release thing, but there doesn't look like there's much in the way of sort of audio-visual feedback when you're doing damage and stuff. And there's a moment in the footage where King Shark does this like massive dive bomb attack that looks like it should be epic, and then kind of almost nothing happens really. And then they show his ultimate ability that's hyped up to be like this massive single target damage ability, and it just looks like a kind of normal takedown from any of these kind of action games. It's also not really clear to me why the kind of over-the-shoulder third-person shooting's really in the game. Like, I suppose I get it for Deadshot, but like Harley Quinn and King Shark, for example, are perfectly capable of beating the shit out of people with melee, so I'm just not really sure why we need to have them shooting guns. I mean, the skeptic in me says that it's so you can have loot involving guns in the game that you can find and upgrade, and they can potentially sell you skins for and loot boxes and whatever else. Then the pièce de résistance is when they reveal the reimagined version of the Arkham counter. I'm not entirely clear on what it is, but it seems like it's just shooting an enemy when they have a glowing thing above them, and it might stun them or make them really annoyed, I guess, whatever that means. They make it sound like it's this revolutionary feature which will bring the Arkham combat into the modern age, but it's not. If it is what I just described it to be, then I'd literally just played Evil West and that has that exact mechanic in it. So I don't know, I don't want to judge the combat too harshly, as I say, without having played it, but I'm just, yeah, something looks a bit off to me. And for a game like this, I think it will live or die by how fun the combat loop is. If a live service game is fun to play, it can get away with mostly anything else. You know, that's how Destiny survived originally. The story was non-existent, there was no end game, but my god, did it feel good to shoot aliens in the head. But if you don't nail that gameplay loop, you could have all the content in the world and the game will still be dead in 6 months. Ask Anthem or Babylon's Fall or Marvel's Avengers or Hyperscape or Paragon or Lawbreakers. You get the point.